couple of words about this cat you've got in front of you. I find a special kind of magic in large-scale human endeavors. I started my career as a freshly minted consultant working for a relatively small Northwest airplane company. Turns out there's 6 million parts in a 747 flying in close formation, and yet they rarely fall out of the sky. How you get up to 250,000 people to touch 6 million parts and make that work is amazing to me. At Amazon, at our larger order fulfillment centers, these buildings may ship and pack over 1 million boxes in one day in our peak holiday times. How you get a couple thousand people to put all the right stuff in 1 million boxes in one day and get those all to the right space, there's a kind of magic in that gives me a sense of awe. So it's my great pleasure then to get to focus on this idea of leading at scale. Now, leading at Amazon at scale has been interesting. Amazon has been growing some. We find that we think this year when Amazon crossed the $100 billion revenue mark, as best we can tell, we think we are the fastest company in history to have hit that mark. We've been growing on a revenue basis. We've also been growing on an employee basis. Now, the interesting part of this, from my point of view, is this. The number of employees per vice president, which are one of the core parts of my target population, has been growing rapidly as well. Many companies that grow, there's a more constant rate of this kind of ratio. But over the course of 6 years, approximately a 5x growth. Imagine what your life would be like if you were going through that kind of growth of your organization. It's our job as a profession to try and figure out how to help folks deal with these kinds of challenges. At Amazon, we talk about lots of different kinds of challenges. Some of the puzzles I think senior leaders are facing to lead at scale include things like, how do you filter signal from noise? With all the information and data coming your way, how do you decide what to pay attention to? How do you transfer high caliber judgment from one group to another? We talk about how Jeff and our senior team 8 years ago or so used to be an operating team. They would make daily detailed operating decisions for the company. They no longer are. Most of those daily operating decisions are being made at the VP level, at the director level. How do you transfer the kind of judgment that accumulates amongst leaders to others as you grow? And how do you make your organization actually get smarter and faster as you grow and not like dumber and slower, to just use crude terms? I think we all have a sense of when things start to get really big, they can start to feel bureaucratic. It can start to seem like we're slowing down. So my team's daily in and out work is to research these kinds of puzzles. How do you figure out how to help leaders with this? Would love your help figuring these things out. Very curious to learn more throughout the next couple of days. How do you help leaders deal with these kinds of puzzles? At Amazon, we talk about leadership in a very simplistic way as this. It's that leading is to unify others toward common goals. And we talk about a couple of different big sets of leadership skills that you need to lead well. This we call leading within your line of sight. In this case, you have a leader, you have some star performers, you have a team. The leader's trying to bring people together toward some goal. Now, when we think about leading within line of sight, in the leadership development profession, we love images like this. We have a leader actually off screen. We like to talk about, it's not about you as leader, it's about what are you seeing. Look at the eyes. Look at the line of sight happening here. In leadership development profession, we love this idea that human beings are being brought together, and where are they looking? How are we looking to the future? How are we trying to figure things out? These are the images that we think about when we're thinking, I think, of leading within your line of sight. Now, our profession, the literature on leadership, is very consistent, I think, as long as you're talking about this. Just a quick scan of top-selling books on Amazon on leadership recently happens that you pulled up some of these things. I find, although there are over 30,000 books on leadership at the moment on Amazon, as you read through them, as diverse of perspectives they talk about, there are some consistent elements. There's skills in common. We talk about coaching skills, delegation skills, team skills, group problem-solving skills, all the kinds of skills that require you to have some kind of interaction with other human beings. These are critical leadership skills. All the skills of leading within your line of sight are extremely important. If we're talking about this, our field seems to be very coherent on it. The puzzles of leading within your line of sight, I think, seem to be pretty well understood. No reinvention needed here. Another kind of leadership skills, however, in addition to this that we think are needed, are skills to lead beyond your line of sight. This is when you're leading other leaders. You may have several layers reporting to you. You may have groups all around the world. You may be working very cross-functionally. Whatever the source is, you're dealing with a level of complexity that doesn't let you just sit down with people around a table and work through your puzzles. Now, imagine that you've moved from kind of leading within your line of sight to needing to lead organizationally, but now imagine that it's not just this. It goes to this, to this, to this, to this. You can't even see the individual people anymore on this picture, and that's my point. How do you lead? How do you guide and influence your organization when you can't sit everybody down around a table together? That's the puzzles that we are very interested in terms of leading beyond your line of sight. Now, when I scan the literature and I think about the topics that we play with, there's many different approaches to trying to lead beyond your line of sight. Here's just a few of the topics that we at least get into. But what I find is that the field seems to not be particularly coherent. It's as if we as a profession sort of fragment into 100 little arcane subspecialties. The moment that you say, wonderful, leading within your line of sight, critical, but what would you add? What other skills do you need to lead at broader scale? Which brings me to my question about this idea of management science. Why is it that we don't seem to have as coherent an approach to this side of the leadership equation? Why is it we seem to not have a particularly coherent approach to the skills that we think senior leaders need? What would we cultivate in them to be able to help them grow maybe $1 trillion company that we're still proud of? These kinds of puzzles. We think that there's room for reinvention or just plain invention in terms of management science. We think that Amazon's reached a scale that many companies start to stumble at. And if we're to thrive any better than many, we think we have to come up with at least a few new answers to some of the puzzles of leading at scale in order to succeed. Very interested over this couple of days to get other ideas. But here are a couple of things that we've been thinking about. In this term of filter signal from noise, we talk about diving deep. It's one of our leadership principles. Dive deep, dive crazy deep, in terms of Jeff Wilke, one of our senior leaders. It's a set of judgment calls that leaders need to learn when coming to Amazon about how deep to dive. In many organizations, it seems that folks, the further you go in your career, the more you're responsible for, the less you get into the details. And as a profession, I think we in leadership development often talk a lot about the need to trust your people. Let them dig into the details and bring together good insight to things. I agree with that. And I'd say, well, how do your people learn? How do you know that they have the judgment that you want? If you move so far away from it, that gets disrupted. And what we find at Amazon, often that one anecdote that could be treated as an outlier often disproves the data model that you ever had, which is frustrating in a pretty data-driven company like ourselves. So one of our approaches to filtering signal from noise, this idea of transferring high caliber judgment. Amazon is very into rigorous thought work. At Amazon, it is pretty much forbidden to use PowerPoint in meetings. We think great sins are committed to intelligent decisions by the use of PowerPoint. Ironic that I, from Amazon, am standing in front of you with these slides. But if you will keep my little dirty secret here, I'll keep going. Instead, at Amazon, when you come to a meeting, you don't bring a slide deck. What you bring is writing. We write full prose narratives. We write 6-pagers. We put incredible time and thought into these kinds of documents. You're expected to bring your best thinking. And then you don't send the document ahead for people to read. You actually bring it to the meeting. We sit down with hard copy generally, and we sit quietly and we read, and we mark up these documents, and we look in great detail at the thinking that you've brought to it. And then you don't get to just walk through, now here's what I meant. The document has to stand on its own, and we launch straight into discussion. Even with the incredible amount of time and writing effort that goes into these kinds of things, I find that it leads to actually faster and better decisions. Some of these other formats, whenever we're thinking about a big important thing that we want to build, something that we want to launch, we actually start by writing a press release. It's not a press release that we actually expect to release on that day. It's this idea of work backwards from your customer. Can you, at the beginning of your idea, can you write out what is of value to this? What would the customer want to be hearing about this thing? And then we work backwards from that to try and build it. We work with tenets. Our leadership principles is one set of them, and mental models. But this idea of how do you really bring rigorous thought work into the room and do that together with people, find is a great way to try and transfer high caliber judgment from one group to another. We also try and use regular business mechanisms to teach. Our CEO of Amazon Web Services, Andy Jassy, is famous for saying, look, every mechanism requires methods of inspection. You use inspections to audit your inputs and outputs, to course correct gaps, and to teach mental models. Use the regular rhythm of doing business to teach. Some of our business review meetings, for example, tend to be quite large meetings. Might be 50, 100 people there, not because everybody has to chime in, although anybody in that room might be called on to explain data or to explain something. It's to help teach. How do you make your organization, as a senior leader, a place that people learn how to run your business through the normal course of your business? This is a strange concept sometimes to those of us in leadership development, but I think it's critical. At Amazon, we have a bias for more of a decoupled, decentralized org structure. We think that's a piece, a small piece, but we think that's a piece of letting us try and be smarter and faster as we grow. Our human org structure tends to mirror, in many ways, our technology architecture. You'll see where in software, this idea of service-oriented architecture and hardened APIs around code, you'll see teams built in a similar structure. We like to try and see if we can reduce the need for coordination between teams. And so we try and decouple things as much as we can, sometimes at great pain and cost. There's always a downside. Org structures, no simple decisions, but it's one of our approaches. We have this idea called the minimum remarkable product. When we launch something, we'll agonize over what is the minimum feature set that the customer will find remarkable. Let's build that fast. Let's launch that fast so we can iterate fast and learn from it. This, in 97, 94, was our first launch. We were just a bookstore. Now they refer to us as the everything store. Amazon Web Services started off with one small cloud computing service, simple storage solution. One small piece that has grown into a very large array of services. We want to learn fast, particularly from customers. We want to be engaged with customers as fast as we can and build from there. To make this work, we have to have a true commitment to failure. If we're going to launch fast and iterate fast, it's a great sin to ever launch something that you know doesn't work. But doing something that doesn't wind up working out is extremely valuable to us. This is a learning function. We want to be able to get out there, learn, iterate, and we're going to fail lots of times. We're going to place lots of bets. It's not so bad at Amazon to launch something that doesn't work out. It's extremely bad at Amazon to not learn from your mistakes. But this true commitment to failing at things is a big part of our culture. These are just a couple of ideas that we've got. It's still day one, in my opinion, on this topic. The whole notion of how do you lead at scale? How do you lead at a scale that no companies reach this fast, but more to the point, leaders themselves have had to go from one size org to 2x, to 3x, to 4x, 5x within a very short amount of time. The skills that we need to teach senior leaders, I think, are an incredibly important and very cool puzzle, and would love any comments that we've got, because we're just barely getting started. Thanks for the teaser.